For the record, I'll call myself Mr. Longbow. My associate will be Mr. Parker. One of my favorite movies is called Way of the Gun. It stars Ryan Phillippe and Benicio del Toro as a pair of sort of anti-heroes in a neo-western. This movie's chock full of excellent shootouts, and one of the reasons that I love it is due to the level of detail and proficiency in all of the gun handling and shootouts throughout the movie. Considering this movie came out in the year 2000, I think it's actually pretty far ahead of its time in a lot of ways in terms of tactics, weapon proficiency shown throughout the movie. And this is largely thanks to the director and writer's brother, who was actually a Navy SEAL who served as a technical advisor on the movie. Bounding drills, malfunctions clearance, reloads, room clearing, one-handed reloading, long-distance shooting, proper usage of an IWB holster, which is astonishingly rare in Hollywood. Like, this was peak gun guy stuff for its time, and it actually still holds up really well. But there's one scene that always kind of sparked my curiosity and stuck with me. There's a shootout scene where our anti-heroes have set up an overwatch position in the hills above a motel parking lot after a kidnapping kind of gone wrong. When the antagonists arrive to take possession of the hostage, our protagonists open up with a Galil from their sniper position, taking out a couple of henchmen in the process. Now, it's cool enough to see a Galil in action in a movie, but it's what the antagonists do here that's really interesting. The lead henchman starts a volley of return fire with his pistol, sort of like lobbing artillery rounds back at the sniper position. It's a unique way of portraying this, and it's pretty effective in the scene. That always made me just kind of wonder, like, would this tactic be effective, and how far could a pistol actually be effective? Now, my associate, Mr. Parker, when asked about how far he's shot with a pistol, claimed to be able to make a 500-yard shot. Normally I would dismiss this as utter horseshit, but Mr. Parker happens to be probably the best pistol shooter in the state, so we headed out to the range to test this out and see what's actually possible. Now, I figured it would be best to probably try and work our way out to the 500-yard shot. No point in trying that if we can't make closer shots. We started off at 100 yards and would progress further back if we could make a successful hit. We each brought a couple of guns to test. I brought an Athena and a Staccato XC. As I just wrapped up doing reviews on these, I thought it'd be kind of an interesting comparison between the two. Mr. Parker brought his Staccato P, his Canic rival, and even a Colt 1911 and 45 ACP just for kicks. The target would be the usual, IPSC steel man-sized shaped target, and we would paint the target in between distance changes so we could see the hits. At 100 yards, we were both pretty confident in our ability to make hits, so in order to make that a little bit more interesting, we started off from the holster and timed it. We each give it a couple tries just to see how fast we could do it, but we were both able to make first round shots. Mr. Parker was able to manage a 142 draw to first shot. I was only able to get a 191, but at 100 yards, I think that'll do for now. We gave all the guns a test to make sure we could actually hit at that distance, but we didn't spend a whole lot of time here. Now, to make things a little bit more interesting, I'm going to put up a scorecard for each gun. Each hit gets 1 point per gun. Though Mr. Parker does get a bonus point at 100 yards for nailing a one-handed, left-hand shot with his iron-sighted old Colt 1911, which is pretty dang impressive. At the end, we'll tally up which gun made the most hits. Each gun would be limited also to only one mag per shooter per shooting position. Basically, we would try and make freestanding shots as far back as we could just for the challenge of it, Then we could switch to a supported position to see how many more hits we could make. The scene that inspired this test were taken from an improvised rest leaning on the hood of a car, so we wouldn't be using any sandbags or ransom rest or anything like that. Whatever support we could get would be from the surroundings. In most cases it was a table, and in one case it was the hood of a vehicle. 200 yards. This distance surprised me a bit in its ease. I'd never shot pistol this far before, but both Mr. Parker and I were able to make freestanding hits pretty easily. Not every shot was hit, but you kind of knew if you missed before the hit even landed. It was a lot easier to kind of call your shots. At this distance, you got to make sure that you're pretty dialed in with trigger control and stance.
Take that, Mr. Parker.
The stance isn't nearly as critical as some people think it is for pistol work at normal pistol distances, but when you're trying to be precise at distance, any little bit of wobbling or imperfect trigger press started to show downrange. Now at this distance, we abandoned the idea of time draws. I only had so much battery life in all our cameras, and I needed to streamline these tests just a little bit. This was the distance that Mr. Parker was also not able to make hits with his iron-sighted 1911 anymore. And he also started to struggle with his staccato P. 500-yard shots started to feel both more possible and also less realistic at the same time. Mr. Parker was able to make one hit with his staccato with his first 3 shots, and made 3 of his next 7 shots with his Canic. 300 yards. This was the distance where things started to get a little bit tricky. Mr. Parker realized that his Delta Point Pro on his staccato P was actually not working correctly. He had blamed his sights being off for not making hits at 200. I made fun of him under my breath because, you know, who wouldn't blame their equipment rather than their skill? But it turns out his optic was actually fucked. The adjustment knobs no longer worked to actually make windage or elevation adjustments, and the dot seemed to be bouncing around shot to shot. We decided here that we would stick with 10 rounds standing before switching to supported, just to kind of streamline things just a little bit more. It's pretty easy to get sucked into wanting to make more hits or making a hit, because most of the misses weren't even far off at this distance. I felt like it easily waste a bunch of ammo fooling around with this. So the round limitation was to keep us from burning too much daylight and battery power and ammo. At 300 yards, you're starting to have to aim well above the target. According to a ballistic calculator online, we should be aiming approximately 10 feet above the target for a 124 grain projectile with a muzzle velocity of about 1,090 feet per second. Only, I wasn't smart enough to think about using math yet, so kind of just been progressively using more Kentucky windage. I guess Kentucky elevation? Yeah, Kentucky elevation to get dialed in at each distance. But we were able to make hits at this distance. Interestingly though, 9mm doesn't drop a ton out to 200 yards. At 200, you should be able to aim near the top of a man-sized target and still land hits within a torso with only 36 inches of drop. Beyond 200, it starts to nosedive pretty rapidly. Mr. Parker made another 3 hits with his Canic, with it taking 7 rounds to hit his first shot standing and only 3 rounds to make a hit from supported. He was also able to make 1 with his staccato P just using the irons from standing, which is pretty decent for 300 yards. I was able to make 3 with the XC, taking 8 shots to make my first hit from standing and taking 3 shots from support. I was able to make 2 with my Athena, basically took 8 rounds to first hit from each position. Now while Mr. Parker had a numerical advantage at the start of our little tests, he was basically down to just the Canic at this point, while both of my 2011s were still making hits.
Nice.
400 yards. This is where things started to get really tricky. Unfortunately, in order to make the distance, we needed to move kind of slightly up on a hill a little bit, and the shooting position was a bit of a janky table that was kind of somewhat pointing downhill. And this is where a red dot kind of stopped being more effective than irons. At this range, you need to aim well above your target. So much so that keeping vertical alignment with the target gets pretty tricky, and trigonometry starts to be a bit of a problem here. At 400 yards, a 5 ammo weight dot completely covers the target. If you could vertically align the dot on the actual target, that is. Except you can't. What we found worked best was using the front sight to line up on the target and that would give us some sort of semblance of horizontal orientation, and then kind of rotating the gun up using the dot to make a judgment of the approximate amount of drop we would have.
To the left, your height's good.
This isn't quite perfect, but it did seem to work out pretty all right. We were able to make hits in fairly short order this way. I was able to make a total of 3 hits with XC with the first round,
Impact.
hitting on round number 5 out of 20, and Mr. Parker was able to make 1 hit on his 7th shot out of 20. I was also so worried about battery power that I forgot to shoot the Athena at all at this range. Shit happens. Since it didn't make a hit, it doesn't advance, and the game was even.
Oh, you hit the can.
500 yards. Now we got to be honest. I thought we would probably tap out around 300 yards. So to advance to 500 yards is a bit surprising, to say the least. In order to get the distance needed for this shot, we had to kind of travel up a hill, and finding a flat spot to shoot actually netted us about 515 yards. And Mr. Parker was a bit cocky in his assertion that he could make a 500-yard offhand shot, and I held him to it.
Remember, Zach, how you said that you'd make this shot from 500 unsupported?
Yeah.
And you're confident about it?
Yeah.
All right. I expect a first round hit then.
And to his credit, his misses were pretty close. But alas, he couldn't make the standing shot, and I made sure to razz him a bit for that. But then again, the shots taken in that scene from the way of the gun weren't unsupported either. It was my turn next. But before we get into the final results, I think it's good to take a second to talk about whether or not a hit at this range would actually be effective. The following is a quote from an article linked in the description on the topic of maximum effective range of the 5.56. The U.S. Department of Defense defines the maximum range as the maximum distance at which a weapon may be expected to be accurate and achieve the desired effect. Desired effect refers to ability to make a disabling injury. Further, according to the Army, a disabling injury may result from 60 foot-pounds or more impact energy.
Probably right in the camera down there.
Now, with a 55 grain bullet and a 3,250 feet per second muzzle velocity, the basic M193 cartridge may deliver such damage at 1,425 yards after hitting a target. Holy fuck, is that a mouthful? Now, if we were able to use 60 foot-pounds as our kind of standard, that even with a 124 grain bullet at 500 yards, we should be about double that at 128 foot-pounds. Now, in the realm of hunting or self-defense, the minimum energy is often considered much higher than that. About 1,000 foot-pounds for an ethical kill on a white-tailed deer, 200 to 300 foot-pounds for self-defense. But the damage needed for effective self-defense at close range, where target needs to be stopped as quickly as possible, is a lot different than what you might need to do at 500 yards. I am also aware of at least one situation where a round actually left a shooting range from a shooting competition, traveled over 500 yards. 520 meters is what I measured based on Google Maps from where the shot was taken to about where the guy would have been hit. And it caused significant injury. Like, the round went deep into his leg and he had to be hospitalized for it. That's something to be considered. So should the scenario arise that you need to suppress an enemy sniper and all you have is your pistol, such as the Hollywood example shown earlier, have at her. Getting hit with a 9mm at this range will likely cause damage, and it will likely take somebody out of the fight. Now, whether you succeed in simply keeping your heads down while you move, or you can actually land a hit and incapacitate them, if only for a short while, it's worth a shot to make your escape. Seeing as that Mr. Parker couldn't make a standing hit, I took my opportunity to show him up. That didn't really happen, though. No hits were recorded from the 9 shots I took from standing. From the supported position, I was able to land 3 of my next 11 shots. Now, another problem at this distance is simply being able to see or hear impacts.
No call. No call.
All of my hits weren't called as hits, and I didn't think that I actually did make any of these until I was editing the footage and seeing the video from the target.
Did you hear that?
I hear the whistle. The last one you shot.
I heard
that one. I heard something.
I heard a whack.
Yeah.
Even misses in the soft dirt were starting to get difficult to see without a decent spotting scope. But after I'd taken my 20 rounds, Zach took another chance from the hood and to finish off his section of 20 rounds, and he was able to land a hit. So he wasn't totally full of shit after all. Bonus round. Now, just for context, I did decide to try this distance with the rifle. And it's no piece of cake with those either. I was only using a non-magnified EOTech on a 13.7 Sons of Liberty upper, and I was able to make hits, but still only 4 out of 13 shots. Unmagnified at this distance is a bitch. There is a significant difference in impacts with a much faster 5.56, and we could hear the hits a bit more definitively. Summary. Is it possible to land hits at 500 yards with a pistol? Turns out, yes, it is. You really have to have your marksmanship skill dialed in to do it, but it's achievable. The distance of the shots in the movie were never actually specified, but I would guess that they were actually closer than this from what we can see in the scene. Whether or not they would be a fight-ending shot or just effective suppressing fire to set up your escape to Bolivia is likely all up to your accuracy. Now, in hindsight, I think we actually probably would have made more hits at 500 if we'd either used a better spotting scope rather than just binoculars, or even something like a hit indicator like magneto speed that flashes when a round hits the target. If you didn't smack the steel in just the right spot, it just didn't move enough or make enough sound for positive hit calls. I was making hits when I was aiming right where I thought I should, but the lack of a positive hit call sent me kind of searching for corrections that didn't need to happen. And I think that's kind of the case for everyone that took those shots that day. Would I try this again? Probably not. There probably isn't a whole lot of value in practicing at this distance beyond the fun of testing it out, but pushing your limits beyond what you're used to, as long as you're not at the point of being unsafe, is important. You won't get better always practicing in your comfort zone. Whether that's speed, accuracy, or both at the same time, it's important to push yourself to see what you can achieve, and almost more importantly, what you can't. If you establish what your limit is, then now you have a goal to reach. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and found it somewhat interesting. It was pretty interesting to me to actually test these things out, because to be honest, this was far beyond what I thought was actually possible with a pistol. And it really opened my eyes up to different avenues of performance and different ways of trying things out. If you made it this far, I'd appreciate it if you drop a like, maybe even consider subscribing or sharing. You could even like handwrite out the link on a piece of paper and then photocopy that and then mail it to all your family and friends. That would be really helpful to me if you don't mind.
Yeah.
You
No,
can try
holster.
holster 2 in 1. Are you gonna make a double holster now?
That's a good idea. I should have just worn 2, like New York Reload.